Welcome back. Well, we've got breaking news. Moments ago, the supreme leader of Iran, Khomeini, posted on X saying, quote, "My congratulations on our dear Iran's victory over the U.S. regime. The U.S. regime entered the war directly because it felt that if it didn't, the Zionist regime would be completely destroyed. It entered the war in an effort to save that regime, but achieved nothing." Khomeini apparently posting that the U.S. entered because of Israel and was afraid Israel would get destroyed. All right, we will parse that out later from Khomeini. Meanwhile, President Trump says that the U.S. will be meeting with Iran next week as the ceasefire between Israel and Iran is holding. CIA Director John Ratcliffe confirming the destruction of the 3 Iranian nuclear sites, saying they were, quote, destroyed and would have to be rebuilt over the course of years. The Trump administration blasting the mainstream media this week for doubting the effectiveness of the strikes on the nuclear facilities, basing their assessment off of a leaked report consisting of only 1 day of intelligence. It was called a low confidence report. The Trump administration will now limit how much classified information it shares with Congress as the FBI investigates a department leak of the preliminary intel report. Joining me now is Missouri Senator Eric Schmitt, member of the Senate Armed Services and Judiciary Committees. Senator, it's good to see you, as always. Thanks for being here. What is your assessment of all of this?
I think it's an incredible week for President Trump. And we talked about this before, Maria. It's a new era of foreign policy, one that's defined by American realism. President Trump identified a core national interest of the United States of America, had those B-2s that came from Missouri, dropped those bunker busters on a target the size of a desk to wipe out and obliterate Iran's nuclear ambitions, and then immediately pivots, and I think this is what's kind of unique about President Trump, immediately pivots to peace. Now we have a ceasefire. He's also gone to NATO this week and got them to commit to 5% of their GDP for their own defense. This is remarkable. Back in 17 and 18, when he was having this conversation with NATO leaders, they were very dismissive. Now, all of a sudden, they've come around his way of thinking, and I think many of us who think that it's time for Europe to step up in a much more meaningful way for their defense. So we can pivot to our core national interest, the United States of America, the homeland, and then, of course, our chief rival, the communists in China. So a huge week from a foreign policy perspective for President Trump. And then, of course, we're debating the big, beautiful bill here. But I think more than anything, it's a testament of how important that election was, Maria, in November. You've got a secure border now. Deportations are underway. You have respect on the world stage and a president that has a clearly defined foreign policy, not one that's aimless like we had under Joe Biden.
Yeah, all really well said. And Senator, as the representative from Missouri and, a military man yourself, a member of the Armed Services Committee, you've got to have such pride seeing those B-2 bombers originating in Missouri and going and doing the work that they did this past weekend, last weekend.
It's pretty incredible. I've been there. Those men and women, they serve our country admirably. And just to think about that feat of being in the air for 30 hours, to have the decoys, some of them going to Guam, some of them flying to the east, to refuel in the air, to get, to be up there for 30 hours and execute something that precise. And I think, again, President Trump made it very clear the very limited scope of our engagement, which is another difference than what we've seen in the last 30 years. We did it. We made that, sort of accomplished that particular goal, and then immediately moved towards peace and a ceasefire. It's pretty remarkable.
All right. So as part of the big, beautiful bill, you've got an increase in defense spending. You are aware of what innovation the president is trying to implement into our armed services and into our weaponry, got the Golden Dome among them. But the president is going to be hosting everyday Americans at the White House today to try to show the GOP who exactly is going to benefit from this big, beautiful bill, get it over the finish line, pass it next week. The Senate ready to work on finalizing it through the weekend as the House tees up for a vote on Tuesday next week. I know Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent met with, or is meeting with SALT caucus members. He did so again last night as the GOP tries to clinch a state and local tax deal in the bill. Senator, how would you characterize where we are right now in terms of what you're doing in the Senate and when it actually travels over to the House again and gets to the president's desk?
Yeah, we're working through it. I mean, that's the best way to put it. We are prepared to be here this weekend and try to get this thing done. There's still some moving parts. You mentioned SALT. The idea that we're quadrupling SALT to subsidize bad decisions from the Pritzkers, the Newsoms, and the Mamdanis is kind of ridiculous. So we're negotiating that. That's about $600 billion worth of subsidy there. So that is certainly something that we're currently negotiating. We want to, deal with that. I think that's a big part of what's happening behind the scenes. But then you also have other provisions that we're going to work through. Everybody's committed to delivering on behalf of the American people, realizing the promises that President Trump made on the campaign trail: no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, making sure we don't have a $4 trillion tax increase. That's about $2,000 per household, making sure we have money to secure the border, making sure we have money for the deportations, making sure we have money for our national defense. All of that stuff's in here. And by the way, school choice provisions that we're fighting for as well. So there's a lot in here for the American people, for families, for working families, and I think that's our sort of North Star and why we're ultimately going to get there. But this is part of the process to work through some of those challenges, so we can have that bill on that big beautiful bill on that big beautiful desk of President Trump.
So, I mean, $600 billion is a big number in terms of removing that from the cost if you took out SALT, but then you alienate certain New Yorkers and Californians in the House. Mike Lawler was really digging in on this, saying that he's not going to vote for anything less than $40,000 on the cap there. But what else is costly, that kind of cost in terms of that neighborhood that needs to come out? Or are you looking at sort of taking a little from lots of different categories?
Yeah, both. But I think the SALT provision, there aren't many places where you get big chunks that you have full alignment, really, from most Republicans, right? And so for 5 people, that's a big price tag. And I just don't philosophically, the Senate, there's no appetite in the Senate conference for any of that. And so we're gonna drive a hard bargain on this, because really it's taxpayer dollars. These are the hard-earned dollars. I think about the people who work every day, like my dad, who works 7 days a week in the midnight shift in Missouri. You want to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars, which is why we're fighting so hard on that stuff. But there are other things that we're trying to find savings on. I mean, we should not be providing health care benefits for illegal immigrants. There's about 1.5 million illegal immigrants who receive Medicaid. That needs to go. So we're working on those things. We're finding a lot of common ground. There's still a little work to do, but I am confident that we're going to get there, because there's so much on the line. There's so much at stake. The American people deserve stability. They deserve permanence with these tax cuts that were implemented in 2017 as well. So do the small businesses, those pass-through companies, the mom and pop stores, the dry cleaners, the small, the restaurant, the neighborhood, dry cleaner, all those folks that rely on those tax cuts that came by in 2017, that they've reinvested in their businesses, hired more people, bought inventory. We want to make those tax cuts permanent too. So
are you also referring to things like the pass-through entity or Section 899, which is also something that business is weighing in on? Yesterday I had on the chairman and CEO of Bank of America. He said, you got to get those tax extensions done. We're counting on it. It'll be a shock to the system if you don't. But then there are others who say, look, Section 899 needs to come out. It's got a lot of unintended consequences because it's putting a tax on big investors who are investing in America. Are you tweaking those things as well in the Senate?
Yeah, that's kind of what's happening right now, Maria. We have our lunches every day. We sort of hash through these things. The committees are still kind of working through. Chairman Crapo's done a great job on the Finance Committee. They're handling a lot of the tax provisions. So all of that stuff's kind of working its way through, and then we hope to have final language here soon, which would allow us to debate over the weekend and hopefully get to final passage.
All right, let me get your take real quick on Jill Biden's right-hand man, Anthony Bernal, refusing to testify before the House Oversight Committee today. He initially agreed that he would testify, but now Chairman James Comer is being forced to send him a subpoena. Former Biden aide Neera Tanden did testify. She had her hands on everything, according to sources, and a source confirmed to Fox that she was authorized to direct Biden's autopen signatures on documents, including pardons, memos, executive orders, though she was unsure who gave the final approval, Senator. You led the first full committee hearing on the cover-up of Biden's mental decline. This is important. People want to understand how all these crazy things happened in the last 4 years and who is calling the shots for things like a wide-open border.
Yeah, well, I can't tell you how many times people in Missouri have asked me, who is running the country? Who is actually in charge? Like, it's kind of an important thing in our constitutional republic, like who's making the decisions as president of the United States. Look at what happened in the last week in this country. You have to have a president like President Trump who's in full command of the office, makes clear decisions. That did not happen for almost probably the full 4 years of Joe Biden's reign, right? So who was? The truth is, you probably had a series of, women's study majors from Ivy League institutions who used to write white papers about open borders are now suddenly in charge of opening the border. So
wow.
This is a bigger scandal than Watergate. We need to continue to drill down on it. We're going to be subpoenaing or getting documents from the archivist to see if there were actually authorizations for the autopen. Has big consequences. I know James Comer's working hard too.
All right, Senator. Great. We'll catch up soon. Thanks so much, Eric.